And for those of you who may be new today, we are Axiomatics. We're the leader in dynamic authorization solutions, and we help enterprises and government agencies adopt a policy-based approach to access control. We've got two great speakers lined up today, David Broussard and Henrik Johansson. David is the Vice President of Customer Relations at Axiomatics, and he directs pre-sales, post-sales, and support teams. He brings over 10 years of experience in distributed system security, software architecture design, and international project management, especially in service-oriented architecture and identity and access management. Henrik is a broad architect and technical project manager at Knowit who has experience with several commercial platforms and technologies. Henrik works with identity and access management, PKI, authentication solutions, and identity federations. Henrik is also a popular speaker and has on many occasions given talks and presentations in larger context. I'll hand it over to these two gentlemen to begin.
Thanks, Lauren, and good evening, Henrik. I think it's evening for you in Europe, right?
Yeah, good evening, David. It's getting a bit dark here in Sweden, so I hope you have...
time of year.
Yeah, it's that time of year, so yeah.
So, Henrik, you and I go way back. We've been working together for nearly 7 years now, and you've been working through your company, Knowit, on many different accounts, mainly in the Nordics. So before we get started with the webinar on testing authorization policies, do you want to give us a quick overview of Knowit and what you do?
Yeah, I'll do that. Be happy to oblige. And Knowit, that you can change. Yeah, there you go. And yeah, it's okay. I've been working with Axiomatics since 2007, so I've been working with you guys a long while and your products. But in the shape of Knowit. Knowit started 1990 and got public listed in 1997. And nowadays it resides in 6 countries, and we drink a lot of coffee, as you can see, and we are nearly, these figures are a bit old, so we are approximately 2,000 employees at the moment, I think. So we're quite a big firm, and what we do is system integration, and we do mostly everything when it comes to IT management and that kind of stuff. So if you jump over to the next slide, I'll give you a little more detail on our business. We have divided ourselves in 3 business areas just to be able to create the best value for our customers. So Knowit Insight is where I work with information security. There we use unique business models and process and strategies. There we work with for example, the development process at our customers to enable them to get more value from their development. We have Knowit Experience, where we create the graphical user interfaces for both web and apps, and then we have Knowit Solutions, where we do big back-end systems, system integration, and yeah, that kind of large enterprise systems. So that's Knowit in about 30 seconds.
Thanks, Henrik. So
yeah,
today's topic is going to focus on testing XACML authorization policies. We've realized over time by talking to our prospects and customers that writing the policies and deploying them is very often not enough. You actually want to test the meaning of the policies. So we'll look at how to do that today in this webinar. We'll look at what I like to call the authorization policy lifecycle, which is a way to guide customers through the process of requirements gathering all the way down to implementation. We'll briefly look at how to write policies using the Abbreviated Language for Authorization, or ALFA. In the testing framework that you developed, Henrik, I believe that this is one of the ways you use to write policies and test the policies, right?
Yeah, right. So this is the preferred way, so it's cool.
All right. And then we'll look at how you use the embedded PDP combined with the PEP SDK for Java and JUnit, a Java testing framework, to develop your testing framework for authorization policies. And then finally, I believe you'll talk to us a little bit about integrating with continuous integration tools like Jenkins to do automated testing.
Exactly. So this is my take on trying to get the policy editing in the same test-driven development like we do with our normal source code. So
right. Yeah. That's actually a good point. We should really consider authorization policies like we do code. They're pretty much the same.
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's go ahead and get started and have a look at the authorization policy lifecycle. When you and I go to talk to different prospects, Henrik, we like to walk through this repeatable process of defining a use case. So what use case is it you're dealing with? If you're in the medical sector, then you might want to be securing medical records, and you might want to share those medical records with patients, physicians, labs, partners, nurses, so on and so forth. If you're in the banking sector, it might be that you want to open up your bank online to consumers or collaborate with authorities. If you're in the manufacturing sector, it might be that you want to streamline the way you manufacture vehicles or other items, and you want to make sure that you share the right information with the right people within the enterprise. So many different use cases depending on your vertical. From your use case, let's say here that we're a hospital implementing electronic health records, you want to gather authorization requirements. And those could be things like doctors can view the medical records of patients assigned to the doctor. Nurses can view and edit the medical records of patients within the same unit as the person. Secretaries or non-medical staff can view the financial information of a patient, so on and so forth. So what you're doing here is you're gathering the different authorization requirements that belong to the use case to either comply with business drivers or compliance or privacy. And you can have any number of authorization requirements. It doesn't really matter. At this stage, all you're doing is building up a flat list of requirements, a long list of requirements that you want to later implement. Once you've done that step, what you want to do is review those requirements and identify the required attributes. You want to know what it is you're using. Do you need a role attribute, a department attribute, a region attribute? You need to identify those attributes, the building blocks, essentially, of those requirements. Once you've done that, you can go into an authoring stage where you take the requirements, you take the attributes, and you implement the policies from those. And then, interestingly, we reach the testing phase, and this is what we're going to focus on today in this webinar. Once you've tested your policies, you can deploy the architecture and deploy the policies into the architecture. And then finally, the last step to close the loop is the access review step, where you want to run access review reports on a regular basis to verify that your policies are still in compliance with the original requirements and that the users in the system do comply to those policies. So, like I said, Henrik, today we're going to focus on testing. It is one of the most fundamental steps in this authorization policy lifecycle, and it's possibly also one of the easiest steps to overlook, to ignore, to dismiss. And that's quite a shame because it is so important. So here in this webinar, we'll help you identify how to run testing and then how to automate the testing through the right tooling. So first of all, what is it you want to test? Well, when we talk about testing, it could be about testing the semantics of the policies. Are they what you think the policies really are? You also want to validate the desired effects. Are you getting permit when you're expecting to get a permit decision? Are you getting access denied when you're expecting to get an access denied decision? These are the different aspects you want to verify. But it's not just about the policies and the effects. It's also about the attributes, right, Henrik? You want to verify that you know how to retrieve the values from the right places.
Yeah, exactly. If you do not have control over your attributes, then your policies will fail. So it's much better to pick that up as early in the policy development phase stages as possible. Yeah, that's correct, Dave.
Right. And ultimately, to make sure that your policies are indeed rock solid, you want to validate against the acceptance tests, which means that when you define your authorization requirements, you also want to design acceptance tests and make sure that they provide you with good coverage. It becomes extremely important. When to test? In line with what you said earlier, Henrik, you mentioned test-driven development, or TDD. This is one of the, I was going to say new trends. It's not new anymore, but it's one of the paradigms in software development whereby you want to design your tests and then implement your application. Well, here, you know, if we draw an analogy, what we want to do is, as you design your requirements, you want to design the acceptance tests, and you want to start running those tests as early and as quickly as possible. So you want to test early, you want to test often, you want to test quickly, which means that you want to test during the development phase of your policies, but also, of course, during the testing phase of your policy, the QA phase, and even during the production phase of your policy. So it is normal and desired even to test during these different phases. Given your experience, Henrik, would you say that most customers you've been dealing with do the testing in all phases, or do they focus on one particular area?
They do the testing mostly in the development phase, and then they do integration test in the test phase, and then there is no more testing. So okay. I think this tool that we're going to show the audience here today is hopefully can drive a change in that area, because testing of the policies is, as you said earlier, equally, it's so important, so we cannot overlook that anymore, I think.
Right. No, it's fundamental in getting good quality policies.
Yeah.
Now, when we mention testing of authorization policies, I can see that there are different types of tests. The first one, which is the one we're going to focus on in this webinar, is what I would call direct binary testing. And I call it binary testing because you send a test and what you get back is a yes or a no, a permit or a deny, and that's what we'll do in a short while. The whole point of direct binary testing is to validate the coverage of your use case. So if we think back to the medical example that I used, you want to verify that nurses can edit, delete, and approve or view medical records. You want to make sure that doctors can only view medical records, so on and so forth. So you want to verify the matrix of use cases that you have. And to do that, it's actually relatively simple. You're going to build authorization requests. We happen to use the standard at Axiomatics called XACML, or XACML, the Extensible Access Control Markup Language. So we're going to use that format and that standard to define the request and also the response. And then what we'll do in the testing tool that you developed, Henrik, is that we're going to focus on certain part of the response, right?
Yeah, you can focus on any part of the response, but I use XPath to dig out the key I'm looking for and then compare it to a predefined value. So you can pretty much look for the decision, or you can look for advices, or you can look for obligations. So it's quite meaningful to get the correct advice or obligation to assert that. So yeah, you can look for different kind of stuff.
Nice. So an example of a direct binary test is, can Alice view record 123? And of course, the answer you'll get back from the policy decision point will be either a permit, a deny, a not applicable, or a deny. And I've lost my screen.
Yep, there you go.
Bear with me for a second. There we go. All right. The second type of testing is open-ended testing. And this is where you want to validate your corner cases, really, where doing binary testing would be too demanding or wouldn't scale well to do testing of your policies. And for that, we have an API called the reverse query that lets you send those open tests, such as which records can Alice view. And instead of getting a yes or a no back, what you would get is a set of filters and a set of conditions back. So the way to test is a little different, but it gives you another view, a complementary view of your testing. So it's a very interesting approach to do testing, and it helps you identify very quickly issues that you might have overlooked in direct binary testing. There is a third way that you can do testing of your policies, and that's to do gap analysis testing. And for that, we have another separate tool called the Policy Auditor that helps you build essentially gap tests. So for instance, you would be able to create a request that says, is there any way a user can view a record outside their department? And the answer, if there is a way, then you've found a gap in your policy. This is a bit different from the binary testing, because in the binary testing you can say, can Alice of the sales department view a record in sales, and you're expecting permit. And then you could ask, can Alice in sales view a record in finance, and you're expecting deny. But then you haven't tested all the other departments, so you have not exhausted all the values for the departments. With the gap analysis test, you can actually do that. You can actually find gaps, and then you can fix the policy by addressing that particular gap. All right. So binary testing is what we're going to focus on today in this webinar. There's really two types of binary testing. Number one, you can, sorry about this. There we go. Number one, you can test in isolation, meaning that you're only going to verify the value of the policy, the meaning or the semantics of the policies. When you do that, you need to provide an authorization request upfront that is going to send all the attributes that you need, and you're going to get back a response that contains the decision that would have been reached if you had all the information. So that type of test is really for semantics validation. And this is, Henrik, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the type of test you're aiming for with your tool.
Yeah, exactly. Total isolation tests do not require any integration or policy information points whatsoever, although it might be done, but not in focus right now, no.
Right. The second type of testing is test in integration, where you've already, and you want to do the second type, by the way, after you've done the first type. It's not like you would want to choose one or the other. You want to run both tests. The first one is what the policy authors would worry about, and the second one is what the architects or the infrastructure people would worry about.
Yeah, and that's where you find the differences between different environments, because you can have one policy working in the development environment and might be working in the test environment, but does not work in the production environment. So you can test in isolation how much you want, but if you do not test the integration, you will not find any bugs.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with the test and integration, your request is only going to contain the key attributes. When I say key attributes, I mean the user identity, the action ID, the resource ID, the resource type, potentially the application ID as well. Anything that the policy decision point would not be capable of retrieving from some other location. And those key attributes are called key because you use them to derive other attributes like the region of a user or the region of a document. And the point of the integration test, like you said, Henrik, is to validate that the plumbing, that the PIP configuration is working correctly. So it's two parts, really. Number one is verifying that the connection is working fine, that the policy decision point can talk to the underlying sources. That's what I call plumbing. And then the other one is actually verifying that the mappings are correct and that the performance as well, by the way, works fine. You want to validate that you get the right number of values back and that it doesn't cost you too much to do so. Now, before we look at your utility, Henrik, I think we need to introduce the Abbreviated Language for Authorization, or ALFA, which is a simplified way of writing policies. As you know, we have different ways of writing policies within our tool set. You could write policies by hand using the XACML XML notation if you wanted to. That's a bit hardcore, but it's actually doable. XML is a bit verbose, so it's kind of hard to understand what's happening within the policy. So then what you would want to do is either use the ALFA plugin for Eclipse, which is a little utility that lets you write ALFA code. And ALFA code is a bit like C# or Java. It's a very simple syntax to be able to write authorization policies. And there's a correlation between ALFA and XACML, so you'll find the same structure, the same notion of policy set, policy, role, decisions like permit, deny, so on and so forth. It's a very simple language to use, and that's what we're going to be using in today's demo, right? I believe your plugin, one of the things it can do is work from ALFA policies. Now, if you want to experiment with ALFA, you can go ahead and download the plugin for free from the Axiomatics website. It's free for non-commercial use, and if you're an Axiomatics customer, then it's fully free for you. And on the fly, it will translate policies into XACML 3.0 for you. And of course, it gives you all the usual freebies of an IDE, like syntax checking, syntax coloring, autocomplete, and so forth. And we'll show you what that looks like as we do the demo. As a matter of fact, recently, a few months ago, Gartner looked into enhancements to XACML, and one of the ones they were impressed with was ALFA, because it makes the language easier to manage, easier to write, easier to understand. This is what a sample policy would look like. So here we have a policy that focuses on records. And again, this could be medical records or financial records. It doesn't really matter. You can see that we still have the same structure as a XACML policy does. So we still have the notion of a policy set. We still have the notion of a policy and the notion of a role. And we can have any number of those elements here in any combination you so desire. So the top level policy set here focuses on controlling access to records. The policy focuses on controlling access to records for managers. And finally, the rule only allows for the view action. So what we're going to do in the plugin, Henrik, is that we're going to go ahead and write some, or in the plugin in your testing framework, should I say, is we're going to write some sample alpha policies, and then we're going to see the impact on the test. Make sense?
Cool. Yeah, cool.
Okay, great. So before we go any further, let me go ahead and bring up my Eclipse. If I can find it somewhere. There we go. So this is what the alpha editor looks like. It's a plugin into Eclipse. And right now, in my scenario, I have a simple policy called main. And that policy contains a policy called example. And that policy called example contains two policies, actually. I can minimize them here. Actually, three policies, I'm sorry. It contains a policy that denies access to sensitive data. It contains a policy that allows people to view records, and we'll see the details. And it contains a policy to edit records. So we'll look at the scenario in a couple slides to see how what scenario we're implementing. But quickly, to give you an impression of how easy it is to write a policy in alpha, if I wanted to deny access before 8 in the morning, I would do the following. Deny out of office. And here I would insert and apply. I would say first applicable. And then deny before 8 a.m. I will write deny. And then I would insert a new attribute, say current time, for instance. You can see the autocomplete. And then I'm going to do less than 8 a.m. And then I would make that a time value. There we go. So this is this simple if you want to write an alpha policy. So this is what makes it very compelling. And then you could add comments, for instance, deny outside office hours. Great. But this webinar is not about alpha, so let's get back to the focus of the webinar, which is the testing. And let's have a look at how we use, or how you used the PEP SDK, Henrik, to build your test framework. Do you want to walk us through your process and what you did?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. It consists of a configuration file that we will look into later. But the main things in the configuration file is you can define the set of policies to test either by supplying a policy package or a domain configuration, or as in this example we will see later, you will pinpoint the main policy file and the reference policy files. And of course, there are tests defined in the configuration file, one or several. And one test consists of one or more assertions. So besides one XACML request. So one request and a one or several assertions per test case to run. So there you have it. We do the assertions by XPath because that's more efficient, and that's the only way that we can extract results and have a unified handling of the XACML response. So there you have it. It's quite simple. It's not much, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, it's straight to the point. It's a very simple and powerful tool. So let's have a look at it at the configuration file in Eclipse. So this is an example here. So like you said, you have a test case, and then you define where your PDP license comes from, and then you potentially could actually pass, like as you said, there's 3 ways of passing it policies, right? You could pass it from a policy package that you would have downloaded from the services manager, or you could pass in an entire domain configuration, which, by the way, in that case, we could also do PIP testing to do the integration testing instead of the isolated testing. And then you can also pass policies directly, which is what we do here. So we point to the translated ALFA policies in our Eclipse environment, and we test from those.
And one great point here, David, is that you could actually load the policies using the policy package, and then you can override some policies in that policy package by pinpointing your own files in the policies tags. So
that's great if you want to tweak your package and see what the impact is.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And then here we have the different tests. So here's one test all the way to here, and then there's more tests. But we're going to walk through them as we walk through the use case. What's interesting to see, as you said, is that to find that you use XPath to inspect the response and know what you're looking for. And like you said, you can look at multiple parts of response, not just the decision. It could also be obligations, advice, and even policy IDs. And here you have your authorization request and all its XACML glory.
Yeah.
So the other aspect, Henrik, is that you use the embedded policy decision point, right?
Yeah, and that's to create a hassle-free environment for the policy developers, mainly because you need to have full control over the environment. And yeah, no, the Express APS it's not the same as using the embedded PDP. It's much faster, and it's much less impact on the client. So the embedded PDP is just great for this scenario. So we can have our testing repeatable, and it's the outcome is always the same. We do not have any external dependencies. We can test in our own little container. So it's pretty neat.
Right. It makes the testing repeatable and isolatable as well.
Yeah.
Which also means that you can integrate with CI tools, right?
Yeah, this is something that I'm working on currently. It's not completely done yet, but the scenario is that you have an automated policy testing in Jenkins. So as soon as a policy gets committed to the source control, Jenkins picks that up and performs a predefined test. And this is pretty much a demand in larger organizations where the policy development and the testing is not executed by the same people. So you have a group of people doing the test cases, as you mentioned earlier, and also maybe the policy definitions and all that. And then you have some policy developers that do the actual implementations. So as soon as they hit the source control with the policies, it gets automatically tested. And as we will see later when you do the exercises, it will show, the results will present itself as it will do in JUnit right here in Eclipse. So this could be a very good integration, but not done yet. So
there's a future.
Yeah, I think we have another webinar.
Yes, I think we need to plan that one.
Yeah, it could be.
So let's have a look at the sample scenario that we built for this webinar today. So like I said earlier, we're going to be focusing on a very simple use case where we control access to records. And the records could be anything. They could be financial records, they could be medical records, they could be manufacturing records, whatever makes sense to you. And our requirements are quite simple for this demo. Number one, managers can view records, any managers, and it doesn't matter where you are. Number two, employees can view records in their region only. Number three, owners can edit records. So these are the three simple requirements we have in our use case. So from those requirements, we can start deriving tests, acceptance tests. For instance, managers should not be able to delete records they do not own, so you want to verify that. So can a manager edit a record, any record? Well, no, it depends on ownership, so we'll have to check the ownership information. What about the ability to view a record that is not in your region? So can an employee in Tallahassee view a record in Kalamazoo? So we'll want to check whether that actually passes. So in the first case, the test is undefined, so we need to further specify it out by adding ownership information. In the second case, the test is fully spec'd out, and we are expecting a deny. So let's give that a go. Let's see how that works in the tool.
Yeah, cool.
So what we did is we go ahead and implemented different tests. I believe that we have I think we have 4 tests today, and then we can go ahead and add more later. If we look at the first one, we'll scroll back up. Can a manager view a record? And we're expecting that, yes, they can. So managers can view records. I have a XACML request where I've added my user role, manager, my action, view, and then the record here. And then in my assertion, I'm looking for a permit decision. So that test should work. Okay. The second assertion here is, can an employee view any record? Now, we sent in view as an action. The role switched to employee, and the object type is always record. And this time, we're expecting a not applicable. In other words, we're not expecting permit, we're not expecting deny, we're expecting not applicable because there's no policy that applies to that scenario. Now, we're going to move down to the third test. Can an employee view a record in their region? So we're expecting a permit. The view is still the action. Chicago is the user's region. Employee is their role. Record is the object type. That hasn't changed. And the record location is Chicago. So yes, that should be a permit. And then another one is, can a user edit a record they do not own? And the answer should be not applicable, as in they shouldn't be able to do it. And if we look at the request, we're looking at edit. We're looking at employee. David is the owner. He's in Chicago. And the record is here. There's the location for the record. It is in Chicago as well. But more importantly, Henrik, you are the owner of that record, so I should not be able to edit your record.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at the policy very quickly. So we have 2 main policies that matter in this scenario. So if we look at line 31, we have the view record policy. And I can go ahead and open that policy up. And then below that, we have on line 53, we have the edit record policy. So inside both policies are going to have rules that determine what is allowed, what is not allowed. Give me a second while my Eclipse tries to open that policy. There we go. You can see here that I look at view. I have 2 roles, manager and employee. Managers can view any records, and then employees can view records if they're in the same region. This is what is stated on this line here. This is called a condition. And then moving on to the edit record, now we're looking at edit as an action, and then the owner check is done as a condition where we're comparing the user ID to the record owner. So let's go ahead and run my test. To do this, we're going to use JUnit. So if we look on the right-hand side, here we have a nice little integration panel. And look at that, we ran 4 tests automatically. If I expand them, you can see that can a manager view a record? Yes. Can an employee view a record? Yep. Can an employee view a record in their region? Yes. Can a user edit record they do not own? No, they can't. So the test did pass because we're looking for a no response. We're looking for a not applicable response. If I did have an invalid test case, so let's go ahead to the very end and copy that test case that we have. And we just rename that second test can a user edit a record they do not own or a record they own, let's make a mistake. And we're going to say that I'm looking for permits. Owners can edit their own record. So you can see how easily you can add use cases. If I run this again, I'm going to have 5 tests, and the last one is going to fail. There we go. It failed, and JUnit here tells us why. It was looking for a permit decision, and we did not get a permit decision back. We got a different decision. If I change my test, if I update it so that it works, if I move this to not applicable, and I run this again, now all tests are going to work fine. There we go. 5 out of 5, success. So what this shows, Henrik, is that it's extremely easy to add new tests, right? You can very quickly spin up new use cases, new tests, and string them together and then run them automatically. And then I think you were telling me this morning that the description is really important so that people understand what the test does. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So it's important here in Eclipse, but it gets more important when you do the automated testing with Jenkins, for example, because then you get test reports created automatically, and for understanding of the testing cycle, it's very useful to clearly identify what tests have been done and what and all the test results needs to be clear, so we get an understanding of what's going on. And all these are built, as you have shown, dynamically from the test case file. So it's no configuration of JUnit or something like that. It gets built dynamically.
Right. And in this particular case, we actually read XACML files. So we read the XACML request, from the config file. But something that you could also do is dynamically generate those requests. So if you wanted to iterate over a large number of values, you would not want to do that manually. So you could actually script the creation of the request.
Yeah, exactly. That's possible.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. So the key benefits, Henrik, for you, according to you, to automated testing, what are those?
I think the ability to have a clear and defined testing environment, that's good for policy testing, and the ability to have the test cases be done centralized and have the policy auditing conforming to the predefined test cases. I think the TDD, as you mentioned before, is a paradigm also applicable for policies, XACML policies. It should be, at least. So I think that's one key getaway. Yeah, and the last point, automated testing increases overall quality in a systematic way. Be able to do this in a controlled and systematic way. We have a predefined scenario of what we're going to test and how we're going to do it is, I think, what's missing in most of the policy developments I've come across. So, yeah, there you have it. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's spot on, and for us, of course, it's increasing the quality, increasing the documentation, and increasing the success rate, but also the speed with which you deploy, because the more quickly, the better you test, the more quickly you'll be able to deploy your new policies.
Yeah, exactly.
So, on that note, Henrik and Lauren, I think we can go ahead and move on to the Q&A part of this webinar.
Yeah.
And as we walk through those questions, let me open up the panel. We could also remind attendees that we do have a blog on our website where we address different questions of the week. They're technical questions usually, and we welcome questions from customers and prospects alike. So if you have something that's been bugging you in terms of XACML and authorization, this is the place to do it.
Yeah.
Lauren, do you have a list of the questions? All right, let me check here in my list. I think we might have lost Lauren on the way.
Okay.
Henrik, one of the questions that we have now is actually the same one as the one we had this morning, which is around the use of JSON in XACML. Does your utility let you send JSON requests and responses?
Not at the moment, no. But you could easily, since we have a JSON support in your product already, it could be easily managed because JSON is a more easy to read notation than XML. So I'm thinking about adding the JSON ability so to get more clear view of what's going on. So that's a good question. It's a good point. I'm putting it on my to-do list. Yeah.
And what I can say from the Axiomatics side is that the PDP can take in a JSON request and a JSON response, so that's not an issue. It's just a matter of how you build the request and the response in the utility. So that's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
We have another question that's just come in. Can you explain what assertion is used for requests in the demo? I only saw the request. Can you show the response formatting too? So if we go back to the configuration, Henrik, and we look at the test case file, what's happening is that we have the request because we send that as a payload to the PDP, right? And then we don't need the entire response. All we need is the XPath to look at the parts we're interested in, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there is no predefined response because the response can look quite different in different stages of the policy authoring. So you only use XPath to export what you're interested in. So there is no predefined response.
Correct. We have a question here, Henrik, that's just come in as well. Would you be willing to make the source code available online? Is that something you'd consider?
I haven't thought of that, but of course, at some point in time, the source code will be available. But you know as well as I, you just have to do that last finish touch.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can send some snippets at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So no problem.
Okay, we have a question regarding policy sets and targets and how they work. So, well, we can go back to the policy here. The way a target works, whether it's XACML XML or just ALFA, is that you use attributes. And attributes are just key value pairs. So here, when I write on line 31, 32, view record, and I write action ID is equal to view, what I'm saying is that you must, in your XACML request, send an attribute called action ID, and there must be at least one value is equal to view. And typically, you would only expect one value for action ID. So that's how it works. And then, of course, you can have any combination of attributes. So you could have a series of and or and statements. So you could, for instance, say view or action ID is equal to read. If, for instance, you have two systems that send synonyms for view. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
We get a big blob that came in right now. So let me scroll up. Can you address attribute semantics, namespace for interoperability across domains? And that's a very, very, very good question. So XACML uses identifiers, and these identifiers can be anything you like. Now, we've realized that if you want to scale across an enterprise that has more than just 2, 3, 4 applications, you might have applications that use the same attributes with the same name, for instance, location. But the meaning of location might be different per application. So we introduced the notion of a namespace, a bit like the notion that you have in C# or Java packages, to be able to give different applications different their own ability, the different local dictionaries, if you will, so they can define their own attributes in isolation of other applications. So this is what's happening here. I have a namespace called user within which I've defined an attribute role. So now this attribute becomes an attribute of the user. So it's a way of building up the dictionary in a way that it will not conflict with the rest of the enterprise.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got a big question that came in. I'm trying to read it. My screen is a bit small for the question. I think we might have to take that that question offline because it's a XACML blob. So I'm sorry for the poster. I'll take it up offline. And that actually wrapped up the questions, the Q&A. Henrik, would you like to add anything before we close this webinar?
Yeah, I hope the audience really has can use this as an eye-opener for the necessity of doing systematic testing of the XACML policies. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Henrik. Thanks to everyone for attending, and see you next time on another Axiomatics webinar, maybe the Jenkins one.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you all.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.